Chapter 43, Mitch Herrier. Chapter 43, Mitch Herrier. The Duchy of Aspen was governed by three prominent families, with the Herrier family representing martial strength. Every child born into the Herrier family, regardless of gender, was taught martial arts. After assessing their talents, only the most promising children were selected for advanced training. Talent, by its nature, is capricious, a game of chance dictated by the whims of fortune. To gather such talent, the Herrier family sought individuals from both direct and collateral branches without discrimination. Mitch Herrier was one such individual. Born into a collateral branch, he had a different family name initially, but now, he was one of the Herrier family. Mitch Herrier had shown extraordinary talent from a young age. At 15, he could take on multiple adult soldiers. The following year, he surpassed the standard of a regular soldier. By 18, he proved his skill by defeating a swordsman at the village level in a one-on-one duel. By 22, he could spar with individuals renowned across a city and hold his own. Those who could rival him in swordsmanship were few, even rarer among his peers. Such an environment nurtured arrogance in him. Why bother with relentless training when I can achieve it after a few tries? Why should he train until his thighs ached and swelled? Why should he swing his sword until his palms bled? He didn't want to. He was content with the present. Unlike the early days of wielding a sword, he no longer put in much effort. Even so, his innate talent alone placed him among the top 3 fighters in the Grey Hounds. For Mitch, this situation was unprecedented. Clang! The downward strike of his sword was deflected from below. Distracted for a moment, he felt the opponent's blade graze his shoulder. Mitch retaliated by thrusting his sword and kicking at his opponent's shin. This was a tactic he often used against weaker opponents. It wasn't easy to block a kick aimed at the legs while preoccupied with the sword. Even if the kick was intercepted, it would create an opening. However, his opponent dodged the thrust by twisting their shoulder and blocked the kick by lifting one leg, maintaining perfect balance. This opponent had solid fundamentals. This wasn't his level a few days ago, Mitch thought, recalling their earlier encounter. The opponent had approached without hesitation, casually saying, "Hello, nice to meet you. Shall we risk our lives on a duel?" He recognized the face. It was that soldier. The one from the enemy unit that had launched a surprise attack. Despite the obscuring mist spreading across the battlefield, how had they made it here? There was no time to ponder further. The opponent lunged with their sword, extending it in a straight line. Clang! Blocking the strike, Mitch thought it might be another feint operation. Thus, he instructed his men to protect the rear while he handled this foe. If the flag fell, the operation would face significant setbacks. Protecting it was his duty here. The enemy soldier countered with a strike aimed at Mitch's head. Mitch intercepted the sword, deflecting it diagonally in a cross pattern. Tying! The blades screeched as they slid past one another. Both fighters pushed with force, creating a gap of over 5 paces between them. Before either could strike again, Mitch spoke. "Were you hiding your skill? It just turned out that way. What's your name?" Ingrid. This was the person Mitch had been dying to face, a foe he needed to kill to feel satisfied. And now, they had come to him of their own accord. Mitch licked his lips. "All right, Ingrid. I'll remember your name." "No need to. I can always remind you later." "Crazy bastard. You're going to die here." Mitch raised his sword above his left shoulder. Having clashed several times, he had gauged Ingrid's skill. It was now time to showcase his full strength. He believed he could sever Ingrid's neck within 5 exchanges. And so, 5 exchanges passed. Mitch furrowed his brows. Frustration crept into his expression. This was a first for him. The opponent wasn't overwhelmingly superior, yet they managed to keep up, just barely. Yet it felt as though they knew all his habits, blocking, enduring, and countering his attacks. Mitch increased his speed and threw in feints, but the battle still didn't end. As the clash dragged on, his focus narrowed. The world faded, leaving only the sword and his opponent. Mitch Herrier felt as if he were holding a sword for the first time again. That sensation when only he and his blade existed under the vast sky. When every strike felt as if it would cleave the opponent, and every thrust felt as if it would pierce them. Mitch fought with that same clarity. He struck downward, curved his attacks, extended his reach, thrust, and spun his strikes. And his opponent did the same. Incrid entered a state of heightened focus, exchanging blows with Mitch in that state. The countless repetitions of that day had made Mitch's habits glaringly obvious. Blocking the kicks and parrying the sword strikes became second nature. But then, the opponent's swordplay changed. The strikes grew fiercer, sharper, thrusting, twisting, slashing, with the blade spinning. Clang! Bang! Thud thud thud. When the blades clashed with full force, sparks flew. Several strikes grazed Incrid's shoulder and side, drawing blood. Though the wounds weren't deep, droplets of blood splattered into the air, and at least 3 moments passed where his life hung by a thread. In those moments, Incrid's focus deepened. Deeper still. He intentionally drove himself further into the state, discarding awareness of his surroundings. He and his sword became the entire world. Every fiber of his being was fully attuned. Only Mitch Hurrier's sword filled his vision. Likewise, Mitch Hurrier saw only Incrid's blade. The two fought like madmen. Every strike was a gamble for their lives. Even the spectators were breathless as deadly blows were exchanged. Having failed to decapitate each other, both bore fresh cuts on their necks. In his concentrated state, Mitch deployed his ultimate technique. He shifted his stance, stepping back with his left foot and forward with his right, creating an unfamiliar distance. He let his sword hang behind his hip, obscuring its tip. Hup! With a short breath, he tensed his muscles. This technique combined defensive and offensive elements. It was a devastating reverse swing called wheel slash, drawing a wide arc from below. By altering his stance to conceal the sword's starting point, Mitch created an unblockable strike. Incrid, now in an even deeper state of immersion, had gained more than just swordsmanship from this duel. I see it. He couldn't visually perceive it, but every movement Mitch made played out vividly in his mind. His sharpened hearing caught every detail, the sound of shifting feet, the controlled breaths as Mitch adjusted his stance. The countless times he had faced Will Slash in the past imprinted an unmistakable image in his mind. He felt as though he could see the hidden blade and even hear Mitch's breaths. All this information came together to predict the timing of the wheel slash. Whoosh! The blade carved through the air, rising from below with a deadly arc. In his hyperfocus state, Incrid instinctively brought his sword down to meet the strike. Incrid's sword collided with the incoming blade of his opponent, Mitch, with a sharp clang. The sheer force of their clash caused a crack to form in Incrid's weapon. Mitch's momentary surprise at his countered strike disrupted his focus, but Incrid remained unwavering. Taking advantage of the opening, Incrid allowed his blade to slide along Mitch's, producing an eerie, screeching sound as the metal surfaces scraped against each other. Mitch instinctively tried to lift his sword, but Incrid pressed down with superior strength, leveraging his training and physical power. The downward force overpowered Mitch's upward resistance, sending Mitch's weapon off balance. In a swift follow-up, Incrid lunged forward, his sword tip piercing Mitch's chest. Though Mitch wore armor, the impact drove deep, leaving a bleeding wound. Retrieving his sword quickly, Incrid stepped back to catch his breath, his body trembling from the exertion. Mitch staggered, blood pooling from his chest wound. He managed to stay on his feet, glaring defiantly at Incrid. I should have countered. If I'd deflected and created an opening, I'd have had the upper hand. You agree, don't you? Victory is determined by results, Incrid replied. Fair enough, Mitch admitted with a bitter laugh. Still, it stings. I should never have neglected my training. His vision blurred as blood loss took its toll, but before Incrid could deliver the finishing blow, reinforcements arrived. A burly man with a thick mustache blocked Incrid's path, slamming a weapon onto Incrid's sword. The impact forced Incrid back a few steps. Protect Mitch, the mustached man shouted, as soldiers moved to shield the wounded Mitch. One of them applied a powder to his chest, quickly stanching the bleeding. Incrid analyzed the mustached man. His breathing was labored, but his stance revealed no openings. It was clear this man had experience. Even so, Incrid wasn't here for duels, he had an objective. You think bigger conduits for sorcery are more flawed, don't you? Incrid asked, watching as Mitch was carried away. His question caught the mustached man off guard, his eyes narrowing. Incrid seized the distraction, kicking up dirt and grass into the man's face before bolting toward the enemy banner. Crossbow bolts whizzed through the air. One grazed Incrid's shoulder, but he pressed on, weaving through the enemy lines. As he neared the banner, he grabbed a discarded throwing knife and launched it at the flag. The heavy fabric resisted the blades, leaving only minor damage. Undeterred, Ingrid reached for a fallen spear, hurling it with all his strength. The spear pierced the banner, tearing a hole in it. The magical conduit was compromised, disrupting the enemy's sorcery. A veil of mist began lifting from the battlefield as Ingrid took a deep breath of relief. The mustached man, enraged by the sight, roared, "You think you'll escape alive after this, you madman?" Ingrid raised his sword, aligning it with his body for defense. There was still work to be done. Chapter 44, The Blue-Eyed Savior. Chapter 44, The Blue-Eyed Savior. The ferry company commander twitched her ears. At the same time, the events unfolding around her became vividly etched in her mind as if she could see them directly. The heightened sensitivity of her 5 senses was a natural gift of the fairy race. Relying on her hearing, she took 2 steps to the right. Swish! She positioned herself directly in front of an enemy soldier thrusting a spear. Her location placed her at the vanguard of her allies. The fairy company commander struck upward at the enemy's spear shaft. At the exact moment the shaft was deflected, the blade in her hand sliced through the air like a leaf riding the wind, piercing the enemy soldier's neck before retracting. Thunk! Squirt! Blood spurted from the punctured neck. She flicked her sword downward, scattering the blood on the blade to the ground. Then she continued moving. Staying in one place would only make her a target for quarrels. As she ran, the fairy company commander wielded her leaf-shaped sword. Ting! 2 bolts struck her blade and ricocheted off. The weapon she held was called Nada. Shorter and sharper than ordinary swords, it resembled a sleek leaf, a design unique to the fairy race. With a hilt that seemed to seamlessly emerge from the blade, the weapon brought to mind a small boat or leaf when unsheathed. Fairy swordsmanship blended 3 forms: flexible, precise, and rapid techniques. Nada was a weapon tailored to this unique style. What the company commander displayed now was a masterful demonstration of such swordsmanship. No soldier could withstand her ability to deflect, parry, and strike as quickly as a beam of light. This isn't good. Even while dispatching enemies with precision, the fairy company commander felt a grim sense of foreboding. Had sorcery always been this dangerous? She had once faced a berserker cursed with a spell. Berserkers, charging heedlessly despite their wounds, were dangerous and violent but temporary. They were not the kind of threat that could overwhelm an entire battlefield. Her knowledge of sorcery was limited to that. So when the fog rolled in, she was caught completely off guard. How could this be sorcery? Thankfully, her preparation had paid off, and her response was timely. The moment the fog appeared, she commanded her unit to form a tight circular formation. When shouts of "Get down!" and "Shields up!" rang out, she ensured those orders were executed without hesitation. Her subleaders frantically repeated her commands like parrots, helping to maintain order amidst the chaos. Suddenly losing visibility was enough to send anyone into panic. It was no wonder the situation seemed dire. Still, the fairy company commander did her duty. Breaking formation, she single-handedly attacked the enemy vanguard, cutting them down and piercing through their ranks. If she didn't act, her allies would soon face annihilation. While the first company might hold, others wouldn't last long. Damn rotten bastard. She silently cursed the battalion commander. Rotten potato sprouts were poisonous, and the fairy race often used botanical metaphors. When potatoes sprout, the sprouts must be cut off before consumption. If not, the poison would accumulate in the body. The current battalion commander was just like those sprouts. In such a situation, the command unit should be devising a strategy, but the battalion commander issued no orders. No signals, no shouts, nothing. He had always led with complacency, relying on his connections. She had warned him countless times about preparing for sorcery, but he never seemed to take it seriously. This kingdom was like a moldy peach, rotten to the core. How could they deploy someone so useless as a battalion commander to the front lines? Even with luck? Would even 10 out of 100 soldiers survive? The fog blinded her allies, a fatal disadvantage. As she predicted a grim outcome, the fog suddenly lifted. Who? The fairy company commander halted, Nada in hand. She was startled. The fog had disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The enemy soldiers were even more bewildered than she was. Who? The enemy spearman directly in front of her froze, unable to thrust his weapon. Her confusion was brief. She had fought well even amidst the fog. Without hesitation, she swung Nada. Tracing a perfect arc in the air, the blade sliced through the enemy's throat. Urk! Another enemy fell. The company commander judged this as the decisive turning point. There was no time to ponder why the fog had vanished. Everyone, turn around! Counterattack! Her shout ignited a chorus of responses. Charge! 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 Kill them! Kill them all! You bastards! We'll slaughter every last one of you. The flower of the battlefield. Infantry! The shift in morale transformed the tide of battle. The ferry company commander reclaimed her place, allowing her unit to surge forward. Company commander! The leader of the first platoon called out. Wipe them out! She replied, her voice firm. The platoon leader responded with a battle cry. Ah! The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on the Allies lifted in an instant. Only then did the ferry company commander wonder why the fog had disappeared. Could it be that squad leader? Though she had no concrete reason, she instinctively thought it might be him. Her intuition, sharp as ever, pointed to him. The commander of Aspen Kingdom's independent company, Grey Hounds, was blocking the retreat path. It was precisely where the fog ended. All he had to do was kill the fleeing enemies. Panicked soldiers running for their lives were easy targets. But then, the fog dissipated. What's this? Why did the fog clear? Commander, the enemy is turning around. The Green Pearl plane offered no cover to obscure vision. From their position, the Greyhound soldiers could clearly see Norillia Kingdom troops reversing their charge. The commander quickly assessed the situation. Whether the sorcerer had bungled the spell or it had backfired, something had gone wrong. If things continued like this, their strategy would fall apart entirely. Attack their rear! Don't break through, slice through their flanks as we advance. Follow me! The commander sprinted forward, leading his men to strike the rear of the Norillia forces. By doing so, they intended to assist their allies in retreating from the front lines. Whoever disrupted this fog? The Greyhound's commander cursed under his breath, vowing to punish the culprit severely. Incrid realized his calculations had been severely off. A bolt lodged in his right shoulder blade rendered him unable to wield his sword effectively with his right hand. His opponent was slightly better than Mitch Hurrier in skill. Even when he tried to focus on a single point, spearmen suddenly lunged at him from behind. No, spearmen targeting his back were the least of his worries. 5 crossbowmen were trailing him, relentlessly aiming at him. One bolt had already struck his thigh. With this leg, running is out of the question. His cracked sword had already broken in half. His opponent wielded a heavy sword, relying on powerful strikes. Incrid was drenched in a mix of his own blood and his enemy's. Seeing him holding his ground with a broken sword in such a state, the mustached man couldn't help but admire him. He was the enemy, had mocked him endlessly, and had disrupted their sorcery, but his tenacity was remarkable. Even now, he showed no signs of surrender. What are you holding on to? The mustached man asked. Incrid, catching his breath, kept his eyes on the crossbowman behind him as he replied. What? Why haven't you given up yet? Incrid answered as if it were obvious. Phew, I'm a squad leader. So? There are 2 of the guys in my squad named Rem and Ragnar. Those 2 fight so well it's hard to believe they're just squad members. Are you saying they'll come to save you? That was one of the possibilities. Having come this far, he expected them to be nearby. But no, they weren't. He hadn't seen them yet, even though he thought they should have shown up by now. If they hadn't arrived by now, they weren't coming. That was the reality. At the same time, REM had obliterated an enemy unit and was cutting through tall grass. Ragnar, having stopped advancing due to the fog, had rejoined the Allies and was unaware of his squad leader's location. The mustached man stepped closer with his sword. Incrid, dragging his injured leg, retreated. Still, his eyes were fiercely alive. What was he aiming for with that body? Could he really escape in this condition? Incrid glanced at the man with the mustache and thought. What a meticulous bastard. Still, he hadn't given up on today. If I die, I'll just start over. He knew this truth all too well. But he also knew he hadn't suffered a fatal blow yet. Above all, if he had wasted all the todays he'd endured, the current Incrid wouldn't exist. Up until the moment of death, Incrid was determined to resist. He would give his all to survive today. Never giving up, fighting until the very end, that was who he was. "You're too good to be an enemy," the mustache muttered, taking another step forward. Ingrid could retreat no further. Behind him, a soldier armed with a spear stared at him menacingly. Ingrid glanced back and then refocused on the mustache, who was now gripping a longsword with both hands. The blade of the bastard sword, longer than a regular sword, reflected the sunlight breaking through the dissipating mist. Right? Left? Which direction should he dodge? Whichever way he chose, a fatal wound was unavoidable. But Ingrid had no intention of dying quietly. "If I can't avoid it..." He tightened his grip on the broken sword. If left or right weren't options, and retreat was impossible, then the only choice was to move forward. As the blade descended, Ingrid made his decision. He charged forward the moment he resolved himself. Thunk! The sound of a bowstring snapping rang out, followed by a bolt embedding itself in his left shoulder. While his attention was on the mustache sword, another soldier had fired a crossbow. Ingrid gritted his teeth against the pain and muttered, "How cheap." "Thanks for the compliment," the mustache replied, devoid of any humor. Even if they managed to kill the man in front of him, the battle's tide had already turned against them. One soldier's life versus the outcome of the war. Even an 8-year-old child could understand which held more value. But letting him go was even less of an option. Whoosh! The mustache brought down his sword, a heavy strike with a large blade. Ingrid didn't close his eyes. He stared at the descending blade, unflinching. The heart of the beast gave him courage. Without blinking, Ingrid pondered. If my body were in peak condition, how would I block this? Even in his final moments, his focus remained on swordsmanship. Then, just as the blade was about to strike his forehead, "Arg!" A scream erupted behind him. Simultaneously, a black shadow struck the mustache sword. Bang! Ingrid couldn't immediately discern what the shadow was. It wasn't a sword or an arrow. If it had been, it wouldn't have struck the blade in midair and twisted in the air before landing. What? Ingrid identified the source of the shadow. Blue eyes and fur as black as silk. It was a black panther. In an instant, a distant memory surfaced. A memory that, under normal circumstances, wasn't so far removed, but felt hazy after reliving so many days. A memory he should have forgotten but hadn't. Seeing the black fur and blue eyes brought it back to him vividly. It was the beast he'd met in the tall grass. "You? Go." The black panther was slightly larger than when he had last seen it. The creature stared at the mustache and then let out a fierce roar. "What the hell is this now?" The mustache's eyebrows shot up in disbelief, followed quickly by an angry scowl. In response, 2 crossbowmen aimed at the panther and fired. "Hey!" Ingrid shouted in alarm. The panther twisted its body gracefully, dodging the quarrels with ease. It leaped a few times, evading them all. Then, with a powerful push off the ground, it lunged forward. The mustache instinctively swung his sword downward. But the panther didn't even get close to him. Its movements were so fast, it looked like a streak of black silk extending across the battlefield. Instead of the mustache, its target was the crossbowman. Gah! With a swipe of its claws, the panther tore through the Achilles tendon of one soldier. Blood spattered everywhere. A leather boot was no match for claws that sharp. Clang! When the panther attacked, another soldier drew a short sword. What happened next was even more astonishing. The panther didn't go after the soldier, it targeted the crossbow. With a swift kick, it broke the crossbow's string. It leaped again, snapping the strings of several more crossbows with its claws and back legs. Was this intentional? 1 or 2 might be coincidence, but cutting the strings on all 5 crossbows couldn't be accidental. "You damn beast," the mustache growled, his face now red with fury. The panther didn't confront him. Instead, it dashed back to Ingrid and bit down on his nape. Gah! It exhaled heavily, as if annoyed, and began running. The beast was astonishingly strong. Though Ingrid's legs and body dragged on the ground, they moved as fast as if he were running himself. His back ached, and cuts appeared on his limbs as they scraped against the ground. As he was dragged, he felt something warm trickling down from his nape. He wanted to check, but he had no time. After them, the mustache bellowed. Even so, escaping this battlefield seemed impossible. "Run," Ingrid said. Of course, the panther didn't respond. The warm liquid continued to flow from his nape as the mustache gave chase. Dragged along the ground, Ingrid felt the futility of the escape. The panther's limits were clear, and the mustache seemed determined not to let them go. "Run," I said, Ingrid repeated, just as a dark shadow loomed overhead. "I'm here to save you." "Who?" "Unexpected reinforcements." "A comrade, drenched in blood." It was someone Ingrid recognized, a platoon leader he used to tease relentlessly. "Platoon leader Vengeance." "Yes. It's me." Vengeance raised his sword, blocking the mustache's advance. And he wasn't alone. A group of allied soldiers followed him, surging forward. Somehow, one squad had broken through and reached them. Ingrid, or rather, the panther, hadn't bought time in vain. Chapter 45, Countless Battles, 1. Chapter 45, Countless Battles, 1. "Come on." Vengeance, the platoon leader, shouted as he swung his sword down. The mustached man held his sword horizontally to the ground and executed a middle guard. The clash of their swords resounded. Clang! As soon as the swords collided, the mustached man stepped forward, pressing his weight against his opponent to push him back. Focused solely on swinging his sword, Vengeance was helplessly flung backward. Ooh! Losing his balance, he not only stumbled but rolled backward several times. A cloud of dust rose where his body came to rest, right beside Ingrid. Vengeance's and Ingrid's eyes met. A brief silence hung between them. A cold breeze whistled through from somewhere. Vengeance's face turned bright red. Carefully choosing his words, Ingrid finally spoke. "You came to save me, right?" Vengeance's pupils quivered violently. "Why is that guy so strong?" Ingrid let out a bitter laugh. "No, seriously, he came to save me, so why did he go down in one hit?" Vengeance rolled himself upright again, grabbed the sword lying on the ground, and assumed his stance once more. "You damn bastard," he spat, glaring at his opponent before yelling out. "Shoot!" Half of Vengeance's squad were archers. "Shoot him down." At his command, arrows flew through the air. "Block them!" "Raise your shields!" Several enemy soldiers trailing closely behind the mustached man stepped forward, raising their shields. Thud, thud, thud. The arrow struck the shields. The timing was impeccable. Peering over the top of a shield, the mustached man glared menacingly at Ingrid. Then, he snatched a shield from one of his subordinates. "You've got to be kidding me." Gritting his teeth, Ingrid forced himself to his feet. Burning pain flared from the bolt embedded in his leg and back. There was no time to groan. Growl. Beside him, a panther bared its fangs. Meanwhile, the mustached man was closing in with the shield in hand. "You lunatic!" Vengeance cried out in shock. Ingrid, suppressing the pain, drew the short sword from Vengeance's belt. Sheeing. By then, the mustached man was almost upon them. There was no room to retreat. Whoosh! Vengeance slashed diagonally across to intercept the opponent's sword. His intent was to halt the charge with sheer force. Feigning a collision, the mustached man twisted his wrist and pulled his sword back, diverting Vengeance's strike. Swish! Vengeance's blade sliced through empty air. Behind him, the panther leaped. But the mustached man wasn't like ordinary soldiers. Angling his shield downward, he blocked the panther's trajectory and shoved it aside. Clang! The panther let out a cry and was sent flying. All of this happened within mere seconds of the clash. Ingrid tightened his grip on the short sword, focusing his mind entirely. In that moment, everything else faded, leaving only him and his opponent. A singular focus. The pain, the relief, and the surge of emotions triggered an intense state of concentration. Time seemed to stretch. Through this heightened awareness, Ingrid could see the bloodshot eyes of the mustached man. He could also see his hand. The man had gripped the pommel, just above the hilt's end, extending his sword's reach to deliver a decisive slash. Raising his blade, he swung downward in a sweeping arc. When did he even lift his sword? The blade was already falling, the guillotine descending. The mustached man's strike seemed to demand, "Repeat this day again and again." Ingrid refused. Holding his breath, he had no room to exhale. There was no time to whine about the pain. He couldn't rely on the basics Ragnar had taught him this time. Then, what among the dozens of techniques he had learned, practiced, observed, and mimicked could he use now? Countless battles, relentless research, and the constant effort to learn and adapt had led him here. His body moved instinctively, raising the short sword. He knew it couldn't withstand a direct clash, it would shatter. The mustached man was certain of his victory. He believed he could finally take the life of the detestable opponent before him. Whoosh! Ting! Cheeing! Crack! In the end, the mustached man's strike failed. He managed to cut only Ingrid's shoulder. Blood poured from the deep wound, but it wasn't fatal. He hadn't succeeded in delivering a killing blow. You? The mustached man froze instead of striking again, his eyes wide in disbelief. Where did you learn that? He demanded. Ingrid answered honestly. From fighting. Mitch Hurrier had shown Ingrid countless instances of flowing techniques, of deflecting attacks. The man's technique was exquisite, and in that perilous moment, it had unconsciously surfaced within Ingrid. As the mustached man's blade fell, Ingrid had intercepted it with his short sword, deflecting it to the side. He'd absorbed the force with the center of the blade and loosened his grip to redirect the attack. Timing, distribution of force, if any element had been off, he would have been dead. His shoulder wouldn't have been the only casualty. Ingrid himself was astonished. So it works. Though he'd studied and endured countless blows, this was the first time he'd used it successfully. For someone like Ingrid, who lacked extraordinary talent, it was almost miraculous. For the first time, his heart raced with excitement. The flowing technique he had just pulled off wasn't something most could replicate, no matter how much they trained. You bastard! Behind the mustached man, Vengeance swung his sword at empty air before turning and charging forward. The mustached man pivoted, deflecting Vengeance's strike and raising his shield again. Thwack! An arrow lodged into the shield. A skilled archer had aimed for him, but he blocked it. Clang! Clang! The mustached man exchanged a few more blows with Vengeance while glaring at Ingrid with fiery eyes. Ingrid, meanwhile, stared down at the short sword in his hand. There was no way he could launch another attack and kill his opponent now. Realizing the danger of lingering any longer, the mustached man turned around. Retreat! He called out and began to withdraw, but not without turning back to address Ingrid one last time. I won't forget you. Ingrid replied sincerely, you can forget me. He meant it. There was no reason for the man to remember him. Vengeance's squad didn't pursue further. They had already advanced far ahead of their allies. To go deeper now would risk annihilation. Hey, your shoulder! Vengeance, glaring at the retreating mustached man, turned back to Ingrid. Blood was dripping down Ingrid's shoulder. Though he had deflected and redirected, it hadn't been perfect. Still, Ingrid smiled. So it works. He echoed the thought he'd had when the technique succeeded earlier. Ingrid tried to recall how he had deflected his opponent's sword, but the memory eluded him. His body had simply moved on its own. Elation surged through him, it was the first time he'd felt this way. You idiot, is this the time to be grinning? Vengeance approached, wrapping Ingrid's shoulder tightly with a cloth. We're out of bandages. Fall back to the rear, to the third platoon. Vengeance ordered his platoon to retreat. The battle was already won, but the company commander had instructed them to pursue the enemy rear cautiously, not too deep. They had been badly burned by enemy magic earlier and needed to regroup. You've lost too much blood, Vengeance muttered as he supported Ingrid. Ingrid, leaning on him, spoke through gritted teeth. We need to take the panther with us. They had saved each other's lives. Leaving the beast behind was not an option now. You're insane. Worry about yourself first. Despite his words, Vengeance also took care of the fallen panther. Inspecting it for injuries, he noticed blood seeping from between its fangs. So that's what was trickling down my back. Even while bleeding from its gums, the panther hadn't let go of him. Ingrid cradled the panther in his arms. It wasn't heavy. How could a body like this possess such strength? A faint whimper came from the panther in his arms. Let's move. Vengeance supported Ingrid as they withdrew from the battlefield. Halfway through, Ingrid drifted in and out of consciousness from the blood loss. The ferryman of the Black River appeared in the void, asking, "Why are you pushing yourself so hard?" The excessive blood loss had made him see things. Unable to answer, Ingrid merely stared at the figure, who continued speaking. "If you fail, just start over." It repeats endlessly, doesn't it? So why go to such lengths? You'll relive today anyway. What's wrong with taking it easy? Rest, stop, polish yourself, and prepare for the next perfect today. If you die, you'll start an even better today, won't you? Oh, are you afraid of death? That fades with time. Half ignore it. What's the harm? No one's watching. That today is yours alone. Ingrid lacked the strength to speak, barely able to drag himself forward as vengeance half carried him. So he answered silently. Why should I settle? Even if it repeats, even if I get another chance, why wouldn't I give my all today? Otherwise, I'd remain stuck, always in the same place. Living like that would trap me in today. Without tomorrow, there's no dream. Without a dream, there's no meaning. I refuse to stop. Even if his steps were slower than others, even if his progress was minuscule, he wanted to keep moving forward. He wanted to live that way. Even if he couldn't become a knight, he wanted to fight for the chance. Thud. When he finally lost the strength to walk, he stumbled over a rock. Don't die on me, vengeance muttered close to his ear. His vision blurred, and the world faded. At some point, the ferryman of the Black River vanished. Ingrid felt he finally understood the nature of this curse. If you could start over, couldn't you do better? When you live the same day over and over, such thoughts naturally arise. But not for Ingrid. He always aimed for tomorrow. Instinctively, he knew that a failed tomorrow was better than a perfect today. To stop is to end. This is why the curse was no blessing. Repeating today forever meant never reaching tomorrow. At the edge of consciousness, Ingrid asked himself, was this truly my best? He didn't know. Only the gods might know what a perfect today looks like. The today he had lived was partly due to luck. There was no guarantee that luck would carry over to a restarted today. In that case, as always, all that remained was to keep walking toward tomorrow. Warmth radiated from the creature in his arms. He glanced down through dim eyes to see the Black Panther gazing up at him, its lake blue eyes meeting his. Ingrid passed out, thinking he might die. If so, he'd just start over. Even if he couldn't reach tomorrow, he wouldn't despair. He'd fight and claw his way through the day again. Darkness enveloped him, pulling him into unconsciousness like a wandering soul invited to the world of shadows. Did I choose wrong? The ferryman of the Black River appeared again. Ingrid overheard his muttering. The ferryman turned his head, his polished, mirror-like black face reflecting nothing. Let's wait and see. With that single line, Ingrid awoke to the sight of a tent ceiling. Hey, you're alive? I really thought you were a goner this time. IEM's voice reached his ears. His shoulder, back, legs, and side throbbed with pain. There wasn't a single spot on his body that didn't hurt. His head spun. The last wound on your shoulder was the worst. I don't know who did it, but they got you good, IEM said, rambling on. Ingrid, still half out of it, blinked a few times. He soon realized warmth at his side and reached out. A dull ache shot through his shoulder. His hand met soft fur. A low, contented rumble came from the Black Panther. I made it through today. You're making a habit of passing out, IEM teased. Like I have a choice. I'm thirsty. Is that so? Through blurry eyes, Ingrid saw IEM sitting with arms crossed. Behind him stood Big Eyes, who handed over a canteen. A few sips felt like rain on parched earth, soothing his dry throat. See? Our squad leader's tough. Alive and kicking, Big Eye said, watching him drink. You've lost too much blood, Jackson commented nonchalantly. A pious squad member prayed in the background. Lord, thank you for answering our prayers, he murmured. Ragnar silently observed before speaking. Are you all right? I'm not dying, Ingrid replied. Because he had survived, he could say those words. Because he had passed today and greeted tomorrow, he could smile faintly before lying down again. Chapter 46, Countless Battles, 2. Chapter 46, Countless Battles, 2. Ingrid's body was riddled with stab wounds and punctures. He had heard that a healer had already tended to him. Fortunately, there won't be any permanent damage. You're lucky, squad leader, Big Eye said with a grin. You sound like you were hoping I'd get hurt, Ingrid retorted. No, I'm just concerned. You should feel honored. You're the first man I've ever worried about, Big Eyes replied, still smiling. All right, fine. Ingrid had expected to be pulled back soon, but their forces were still facing off against the Duchy of Aspen. Would there be another battle? Even if there was, it wouldn't concern Ingrid. It was impossible for him to return to the battlefield in his current state unless it was just to watch. Big Eyes had left behind an apple, which Ingrid was lazily chewing when REM entered the tent. The rest of the squad was away, leaving the tent empty. REM sat beside him, resting his elbows on his knees and his chin on his clasped hands. He stared intently at Ingrid without saying a word, his lips pressed in a straight line. If you're planning to confess, I'll save you the trouble and reject you now, Ingrid teased. Don't you know I like women? If you and a random girl I've never met fell into a river, I'd save the girl, as long as she's pretty, of course. Don't worry about me. I can swim just fine. I'll survive on my own. Now that I think about it, I'm not great at swimming. So be sure to save me if need be. What was this idiot thinking when he said he'd save a drowning woman? Typical REM. Sure, I'll throw you a rock, Ingrid joked. Their usual banter carried on until REM suddenly stopped talking and stared directly at Ingrid. His grey eyes held an unusual seriousness. Do you have something to say? How did you know it was sorcery? REM asked. Who? Ingrid hadn't expected this question here and now. I saw it during reconnaissance. Just from seeing that, you guessed it was sorcery? You seem to know the flagpole was the thing keeping it together. He was right. That had been the goal. Ingrid knew everything, though he couldn't exactly admit it was because he had lived through the day repeatedly. He needed a plausible excuse. While considering a mix of lies and explanations, REM's piercing grey eyes unsettled him. Even if he told the truth, REM wouldn't believe it. But did he have to lie entirely? A poor lie would be obvious to someone like REM, and Ingrid didn't want to treat him that way. So he spoke a half-truth. I used to know someone from the Western tribes, he began. It was true. REM himself was from the West. I picked up a lot from them. Also true, REM had shared things about sorcery with him. So I thought about it and made some guesses. This part wasn't entirely true but close enough. Instead of thinking it through, he had figured it out by physically repeating the day over and over. The flagpole seemed like the medium for the sorcery. I noticed the enemy's formation looked strange before the fog rolled in. After that, I charged in. When truth is mixed with lies, it's harder to detect deceit. That's because the speaker believes in what they're saying. Ingrid spoke with sincerity, hiding only what he couldn't reveal. REM believed him, or at least didn't challenge him further. That's how it was. It's impressive you figured it out so quickly. So, what about sorcery? I was going to tell you not to meddle with those kinds of things recklessly, REM replied. Got it. REM nodded. Ingrid suddenly remembered that REM had been absent during the battle. He'd assumed REM would come to his position after the charge, but he hadn't. Instead, REM rejoined the squad later. Where were you during the battle? Ingrid asked. Nothing much. I was curious about who put up the flagpoles, so I went to check it out. You checked it out? Yeah, he had a chat with my axe, REM said with a grin before leaving the tent. Ingrid thought back to the moment he had destroyed the flagpole. The sorcerer had been shaking a bell and disappeared almost immediately afterward. Ingrid had been too focused on destroying the flagpole to think about it. It seemed the sorcerer had retreated but had run straight into REM's axe. Ingrid dismissed it as nothing unusual. REM's reckless behavior was nothing new. In a previous battle, REM had charged into the enemy lines, claiming he wanted to take down some hawk claw or other. The platoon leader had given up on keeping REM's squad in line, treating them as an auxiliary force instead. This time was no different, except for one detail. Ingrid himself had broken formation first. Hey, you all right? The platoon leader entered the tent. Checking in on me? Are we heading back soon? Ingrid asked. The platoon leader shrugged. No orders yet. We're all on standby. Winter was approaching, making prolonged battles unlikely. While the position wouldn't be entirely abandoned, their battalion had done the heavy lifting here and was due for a rotation. The delay in orders felt odd. The platoon leader scratched his head, looking at Ingrid. You Yes? At the time, the platoon leader hadn't thought much of Incrid breaking formation, just figured he'd finally lost it. But then came the shouted orders to duck and raise shields, which saved them from the fog. Later, he learned that the fog was sorcery, dependent on a medium, something that had to be destroyed or the sorcerer killed to lift it. The company commander had asked him directly, "Who do you think did it?" The platoon leader had thought of Incrid. It wasn't hard to guess that his squad had played a role, especially since Incrid had charged out just before the fog rolled in. And the voice shouting those orders had sounded like Incrid's. The platoon leader finally spoke. "That fog, it was sorcery, right?" "Yes, I reported it," Incrid replied. "Right. You did," the platoon leader muttered. The platoon leader glanced at Incrid briefly, then rose after advising him to rest well. Impossible. He knew Incrid's abilities. Certainly not the lowest, but at best, he was only fit to lead a village militia. Among his subordinates, there were some fearsome fighters, but Incrid wasn't one of them. The medium for the spell must have been located deep within enemy lines, no competent foe would place it elsewhere. That meant someone would have had to infiltrate that far. Through that dense fog. While facing barrages of bolts and arrows. And it was that troublesome squad leader? Unthinkable. On the off chance, he asked if REM had done it, but it wasn't him. As for Ragnar, it was out of the question. By the time the fog had cleared, Ragnar had been fighting nearby as though he'd always been there. That left the other squad members, but they had also been fighting as part of the rear squad formation. Could reinforcements have come from the main force? Pondering this, the squad leader stepped outside the barracks. The sharp drop in temperature made the cold bite at him. Are we ever retreating? He, too, missed the city air. He wanted to see his home, his wife, and his daughter again. He longed to roast potatoes over a fire and sleep soundly. After 2 days bedridden, Incrid was finally able to move around. Don't overdo it, warned Big Eyes, though Incrid's condition was surprisingly good. That beast is gone, right? Big Eyes asked. Incrid, who had been sitting upright on the bed, nodded while glancing around. Seems so. I don't see it anywhere. It looked like it followed you well. Weren't you scared? Of course, I was. It's a beast. A beast. It seemed like a cub to me. You know that hunter, Henry, who used to go scouting with you? He was out with the squad leader, Big Eye suddenly said. Incrid nodded, musing on how well-connected Big Eye seemed to be. How did he even know Henry? That guy's from the Plains Hunting Guild, Big Eyes continued. Incrid knew that better than anyone, having learned much from Henry personally. Henry said there are many beasts on the Green Pearl Plains, but the most notable of them all, do you know what it is? What? A black panther with blue eyes, called a lake panther. They say its eyes resemble lakes, hence the name. While it hunts gazelles and gnus, it primarily feeds on the energies of the earth. It's a spirit beast, and just one of its claws is said to be worth over 10,000 krona. Krona was the empire's currency. 1 bronze coin was worth 1 krona, 100 bronze coins equaled 1 silver coin, and 100 silver coins equaled 1 gold coin. 10,000 krona equated to 1 gold coin, more than Incrid's salary. You think you could pluck out that claw while it's slashing your throat? No thanks. I'm not that greedy. Big Eyes waved his hands dismissively. Moving around a bit brought a light sheen of sweat to Incrid's forehead, along with a dull ache. Still, this wasn't bad. After experiencing death so often, gauging a wound's severity by its pain was second nature to him. Overdoing it will make it worse, warned Jackson, who had been observing. With everyone else gone, it was just him and Big Eyes remaining. I'm pacing myself. As Incrid moved again, the memory of deflecting the mustached man's strike resurfaced. How had he managed it? Could he do it again? He wasn't sure. Maybe, but if he tried a few more times, it might come to him. Lost in thought, he noticed REM and Ragnar returning. Walk a little farther away from me. Laziness is contagious, REM quipped. And why are you always so eager to die? Ragnar retorted, doubling the intensity of the squabble. Before their argument could escalate, Incrid spoke up. I have a question. About swordsmanship. Both men turned their attention to him. Speak. If it's swordsmanship, I'm the one to answer. As they resumed glaring at each other, Incrid quickly explained. It wasn't a complicated story. He had observed an enemy several times, and it had become ingrained, manifesting unconsciously. He spoke as plainly as he could. Well, isn't that just something that happens with practice? REM replied first. That's an interesting experience, Ragnar added. I wouldn't call myself special, having grown up with it, but for someone like you, yes. It must be divine providence. The goddess of fortune must have tripped and spilled a bag of gold coins over you. Neither response was particularly helpful. After some more bickering, the two offered additional insights. Sometimes, your vision opens up in battle. Usually, it takes countless, and I mean countless, repetitions in real combat for that to happen even once. If you've achieved pinpoint focus, the odds improve. The heart of the beast probably stuck with you a bit. It gave you the ability to stare your opponent down without blinking. If you had the chance to watch someone wield a sword right in front of you, you might have seen their technique or how they distributed their strength. Then, your body could have instinctively reacted. But that's only if you've mastered the basics. Basics aside, you'd also need hundreds of grueling battles. Hearing this, Ingrid came to a realization. For some, today was just another day. But for Ingrid, today was the culmination of hundreds of relentless battles. Not a single one wasted. Each moment had been a desperate struggle, lived to the fullest, endured and savored. That wealth of experience had granted him what others might call luck. But it wasn't luck. It was a natural outcome. The price he paid, studying and experimenting even while being slashed, stabbed, and wounded, had borne fruit. At its foundation were the heart of the beast and singular focus, granting him daring and clarity. Thank you, he thought, feeling gratitude anew. These two had given him so much. Ragnar, in particular, had rebuilt the foundations of his swordsmanship. The fight with manhwa, the pursuit by the mustached man, today's battle on the field, they all coalesced into one desire. He wanted to wield his sword again, to swing it and see how much of that last deflection had become second nature. I want to spar. When Ingrid muttered this, both REM and Ragnar shook their heads. REM added, I've been called insane since I was a kid, but you, Captain, are even crazier than me. That was the last thing Ingrid wanted to hear, from REM of all people. This was a man who bullied soldiers for fun and tried to decapitate his superiors. To be deemed crazier than him? I have to agree, Ragnar said. Sparring in your condition is absurd. Was wanting to spar so wrong? Ingrid felt deeply wronged. It's too much for you to spar in your condition, squad leader. The tents flap parted, and a voice interrupted them. Looking up, Ingrid saw the ferry company commander stepping in. As Ingrid struggled to stand, the commander strode toward him. Was it you? Before Ingrid could even salute, the commander's sharp, cold, statue-like beauty loomed over him, piercing him with her words. Ingrid licked his dry lips before answering. He'd expected this question, not from REM, but from her. How had he broken the spell? After all, that was a question for the command. Chapter 47, Squire or Apprentice Knight. Chapter 47, Squire or Apprentice Knight. The ferry company commander learned after the battle that the medium for the sorcery was the flag. So, who destroyed that flag? Tracing the battlefield situation backward led to the answer. That reckless squad leader. That was why she was here. It was something even the battalion commander hadn't paid much attention to. He didn't seem to care who destroyed the medium for the sorcery. He simply thought the foolish sorcerer had failed. In truth, considering how many frauds existed among the continent's sorcerers, that assumption sounded reasonable. Even so, the battalion commander likely didn't have the luxury to think straight. A figure higher than his direct superior had come to the unit. What do you mean? She answered the implied question about whether it was him. Sorcery, flag, medium. With just 3 short words, she conveyed everything she wanted to say. Ingrid, for his part, hadn't been asked and thus hadn't denied it, but he also wasn't the type to insist on credit. Yes, I did it, he admitted. How? The short question came back. I picked up a spear and threw it. There were 5 decoys. There had been 6 poles in total, but only 1 was real. I guessed. You knew the flagpole was the medium. I observed some things during reconnaissance and had some prior knowledge of sorcery. His answers were confident and without hesitation. The fairy's sharp instincts confirmed he wasn't lying. However, even without those instincts, it was evident he wasn't sharing everything. It was as if he didn't mind admitting what he'd done but was reluctant to elaborate further. The fairy company commander nodded as she studied Ingrid's blue eyes. Understood. Did you come here just to ask that? Yes, and to see your face. The commander paused briefly, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. It seems we are destined to be connected. She left after saying those words, leaving behind a statement ripe for misunderstanding. Ingrid was left stunned, and Rem jabbed him in the side. What's your secret? What? Tell me how you managed to charm a fairy. I'm all ears. Impressive, added Ragnar. It's probably not what it looks like, Ingrid replied. Even Big Eyes acknowledged Ingrid's looks. Women occasionally took an interest in him when he was in the city, even without effort. It went without saying that he wasn't inexperienced. Ingrid wasn't naive or clueless enough to mistake the signals exchanged between men and women. But that conversation? It wasn't about signals. If anything, it left a sense of unease. Especially considering she was the superior of his direct superior. When would he have even had the time? Oh, I get it. Was it then? When he was in the medical tent. That's the only possible time. No, you crazy bastard. Rem continued to tease him for the next 4 hours, while Ragnar eventually took a nap midway. Later, Jackson arrived, nodded meaninglessly, and somewhat eased Ingrid's mood. When Big Eyes arrived, he started to say something but then leaned close to Ingrid after hearing what Rem had said. That's why I told you to quit rolling around on the battlefield and join me in opening a noble women's salon. No way, you lunatic. Big Eye's dream was to save up enough krona to open his own shop. His vision? A salon where charming men would chat with noble women. His plan was clear: sell drinks and snacks at exorbitant prices, knowing the clientele would come anyway. He'd once pitched this idea to Rem, nearly getting beaten for it, and rarely brought it up since. Now, it resurfaced. Don't talk to me about it. I'll split your head with my axe. Rem smiled menacingly from behind. Ah, fine. Forget it, Big Eyes replied, his voice near a whimper. Always acting like a barbarian at times like this, he muttered under his breath, lacking the courage to say it louder. To his credit, muttering it at all was bold. There was no way Rem hadn't heard it. Rem glared, but Big Eyes quickly clapped his hands together. Oh, right. I almost forgot what I came here for. Got distracted by the squad leader talk. Distracted, indeed. He'd rushed to speak before Rem could retort. Ingrid decided to let it slide, thinking that any story, as long as it wasn't about a love story between him and the company commander, would be better. He's coming. Who? He's already arrived. Big Eyes leaned in and whispered, his expression unusually serious, drawing Ingrid's attention. A knight squire. From the Crimson Cape Knights. Ingrid asked. Yes. Currently, Ingrid and the others were part of the Cyprus Division. That was also the name of one of the knights of the Crimson Mantle Knight Order. Typically, a military division bore the name of a knight who belonged to the knightly order. And naturally, knights were rare talents even across the continent. Thus, not all members of a knightly order were knights. Some were those who aspired to be knights in the future, squires, both attendants and apprentices. After their apprenticeship, if recognized by a knight, they became semi-knights, officially joining the knightly order. Squires usually didn't participate in battles independently. The fact that one had come to the battlefield meant only one thing. They're about to become a semi-knight. What does it mean to be a knight? A minstrel once said. Thinking of knights as the same as ordinary people is a grave misunderstanding. Yes, that's right. They've transcended human limitations, reaching beyond what is possible for most. Otherwise, how could they stand against beings like frogs? Knights were said to surpass human limits. And junior knights? They were individuals who approached those limits. The squire that has come would soon become a junior knight and officially join the knightly order. Ingrid was curious to see their skills. Becoming a knight wasn't just about earning an honorary title. In this era, knights were symbols of strength. And a part of that symbol was here. You look like you'd die to see them. Rem observed Ingrid's expression. Wouldn't you? I heard they're already ready for deployment. Big Eyes added. They came alone. Rem asked, crossing his arms. Big Eyes nodded. Yes, they said one was enough. With that, Ingrid understood why their army hadn't withdrawn. If Aspen has prepared sorcery, then their side was taking out their trump card. Both Norelia and Aspen had done the same. Every year, the same dull skirmishes played out in this region, but now, a variable had been introduced. Is this a bid to seize part of the plains? If the sorcery had taken effect as intended, even the squire arriving on the battlefield would have been powerless to make a difference. But that was no longer the case. The spell had been thwarted, and now, victory was firmly in their grasp. Had the squire arrived just a day or two earlier, the enemy would have been crushed outright. They were a little late. By now, the enemy had reorganized and regained their footing. Prepare for deployment. The entire army moves out at once. Ingrid's drifting thoughts were interrupted by the sounds outside. It was the platoon leader's voice. Moments later, the leader stuck his head into the tent. Hey, you heard that, didn't you? Of course, you did. After spotting Creyas, the platoon leader answered his own question. We're all moving out. The plan is to push the forward lines on Green Pearl Plain as close as possible to the enemy's position. Is it wise to discuss strategy so openly? Ingrid asked, looking at the platoon leader. There's nothing to hide. We're heading out now, aren't we? You coming? I'd like to see how things unfold. Ingrid struggled to his feet. His injuries hadn't fully healed yet, and under normal circumstances, he shouldn't even be contemplating the battlefield. I'll stay by your side. Creyas raised a hand, volunteering. He always made sure to stick to the rear and prioritize his own safety. If Ingrid stayed with him, things should be manageable. The platoon leader didn't particularly care for Ingrid, viewing him as more of a burden. With his advanced age and the unruly squad he led, clashes were inevitable. Even so, he couldn't stomach the thought of Ingrid dying. Despite the ridicule he faced, Ingrid was relentless in honing his swordsmanship and never let a moment go to waste. Watching someone like that become a corpse would leave a bitter taste. Take care of yourself. The platoon leader muttered before stepping out. If you're curious, you might as well join. REM nodded. Meanwhile, Ragnar began preparing for deployment, gathering his gear methodically. Jackson fastened his sword and tucked a few throwing knives into his belt, an unusual sight since he rarely armed himself so thoroughly. I'll stay by your side, Jackson said. By my side. REM teased, but Jackson shook his head. You stink. Sharing a barracks with you is bad enough. While REM excelled at light-hearted teasing, Jackson had a knack for delivering sharp, stinging remarks. Platoon leader, I think I'd rather bash this guy's head in than fight Aspen's troops. What do you think? Hold it. Let's just watch. Aren't you curious to see how well the squire fights? They'll fight exceptionally well, no doubt. REM grabbed his axe, grumbling. As Ingrid limped toward the deployment area, Vengeance approached. Are you out of your mind? Do you have a death wish? After the previous battle, when Ingrid had thanked him, Vengeance had grumbled, claiming he'd repaid a debt and that it was all behind them now. When Ingrid asked what debt he was referring to, Vengeance had retorted, the medical tent fire. Don't tell me you forgot. How could I forget? But Ingrid had, in fact, forgotten. Repeating the same daily grind had dulled his memory. Even so, it wasn't something he could entirely erase, the assassin, the fire, and Krang. The fire had been Ingrid's doing, though Vengeance believed he'd saved him from the flames, when in truth, Ingrid had saved him from the assassin's blade. A debt is a debt. If it made things easier for Vengeance to think that way, so be it. Thanks to that belief, Vengeance had charged to his rescue unhesitatingly. Watching him glare at the enemy from the battlefield, Ingrid spoke up. Who wants to die? Then why are you out here? I wanted to see something. See what? They say a squire has arrived. Oh, right. Don't push yourself. I'm not saving you twice. With that, Vengeance returned to his formation. What's with him acting all buddy-buddy? Didn't he used to pick fights with you all the time? REM asked. He had, once. There was a time Vengeance couldn't stand Ingrid. He's not that guy. He's the platoon leader. Turns out he's a decent person once you get to know him. Don't go soft on people. If you let your guard down and get stabbed in the back, it'll be too late to cry about it. Worry about yourself. The formation quickly assembled and began marching. It wasn't a clean, tight formation, but a loose, radial one. At the vanguard, someone stood alone. A crimson cloak fluttered in the wind. The figure walked forward, their cloak billowing with each step. Despite the unimpressive appearance, their gait hinted at something extraordinary. Judging by their steps, they've got skill, Rem said, arms crossed, squinting at the figure. More than just skill. Their posture is perfect. Unless the enemy has a frog on their side, this won't even be a contest, Ragnar added. Jackson's gaze followed the figure in the crimson cloak, studying their movements. Meanwhile, Creius muttered to Incrid, we should fall back now. If we don't, we'll get caught in it. Creius seemed to sense the moment to retreat. Suddenly, the crimson cloak flared, catching the wind. The cloaked figure surged forward. Incrid blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure's movements left after images. How fast does one have to move to leave a trail like that? They must have infused their legs with will, Ragnar murmured. Incrid didn't fully grasp the meaning but didn't bother asking. Now was a time for focus, not questions. The enemy, startled, loosed a volley of arrows. Unlike before, there were no crossbowmen stationed separately. Instead, a dense cloud of arrows darkened the sky. At least 100 archers must have fired in unison. The arrow storm rained down on the cloaked figure. The squire didn't swing their sword but accelerated instead. Boom! The ground exploded as dirt and debris flew, and the cloaked figure closed the distance to the enemy. Simply outrunning the range of the arrows was a feat beyond human limits. It was clear. This was no ordinary movement. Chapter 48, 48, if there was an end, crawling was enough. Chapter 48, if there was an end, crawling was enough. In small-scale skirmishes, such a level of force had never been deployed before. Just as the enemy had prepared their sorcery, this side had prepared a squire. The impact of that squire on the battlefield was nothing short of catastrophic. Dodging the rain of arrows with forward momentum, the squire unsheathed his sword and slashed. Wing! As a silver arc carved through the air, the heads of 3 soldiers blocking the front rolled to the ground in unison. The squire retrieved his sword and swung it down from above. Like a bolt of black lightning, the blade struck downward and immediately rebounded upward. The head of a spear-wielding infantryman was caught in its path. Crack! It wasn't just cut, it was shattered. The force of the sword's impact crushed the soldier's skull. And then the blade, as if taking flight like a butterfly, sliced through the air. The fluttering wings of that butterfly transformed into a fearsome requiem of terror. The piercing slashes of the blade sought out openings, snuffing the life from the enemy soldiers. 2 soldiers with heavy wooden shields stepped forward, blocking the path. As they covered themselves entirely with their shields, the butterfly's wings were halted. The sword struck the shields repeatedly, leaving deep dents in their surfaces. Close in! One of the enemy soldiers shouted, sweat pouring from his face, doing his utmost to command. But no amount of effort could free him from the clutches of death. The crimson-cloaked figure gripped his sword with both hands and swung horizontally. Boom! Crack! The blade battered the shields. While the metal reinforcements on the shields held and prevented them from being sliced through, the hands of the soldiers holding them could not withstand the impact. The wrist of one soldier twisted and broke, the bone piercing through the skin. As the shield fell limply to the ground, the blade cleaved through the soldier's torso. His upper body was severed, and his innards spilled onto the ground with a sickening thud, blood splattering everywhere. Terror seeped into the eyes of the surrounding soldiers. Damn it all! One soldier from the Grand Duchy of Aspen muttered a curse, his voice trembling. The cloaked figure's nose twitched, as though catching the sound, and he immediately sprang forward. As fearsome as his swordsmanship was, his most terrifying aspect was his footwork. The moment his feet touched the ground, he would disappear in a flash, reappearing to decapitate a soldier or pierce a hole through their body. Even raising shields or armor against him seemed utterly futile. Shoot him! One of the commanders gave a decisive order. It was a bold decision. 30 crossbowmen, stationed nearby, loosed their quarrels. Dodging all of the close-range projectiles was impossible, or so the commander thought. But the cloaked figure shattered that certainty. Bang! Before the quarrels could reach him, he leaped into the air, soaring upward. The bolt sliced harmlessly through empty space. What goes up must come down. Arcing gracefully through the air, the cloaked figure landed 10 paces from the Dutch's commander. The heart of the enemy formation. Stop him! The Dutch's top commander's cry was pitiful. If the Greyhounds unit was still present, it might have been different. But they had already withdrawn, burdened with the responsibility for the defeat, injuries to Mitch Hurrier, and other complex circumstances. Who? The cloaked figure exhaled deeply and swung his sword once more. From above to below, then from below to above. Whoosh! The blade, bending like a whip, tore through the bodyguards around the commander. Thwack! Crackle! The thick leather armor of one guard was completely split. Another guard, wearing a steel helmet, was struck in the head by the flat of the blade and thrown aside. Thud! The guard, knocked to the ground, bled profusely from his nose. Though he appeared intact outwardly, the impact had fractured his skull, killing him. Having dispatched the guards, the squire plunged his sword into the commander's throat. Squelch! Alone, the squire killed the enemy commander in the heart of their formation and turned to retreat. Even his retreat was remarkable. With a single kick to an enemy soldier, he launched himself forward, sprinting across the battlefield in a series of bursts. From a distance, the red figure seemed to carve a straight line through the heart of the battlefield. Incrid and his companions had watched the fight unfold from start to finish. Rem, observing the cloaked squire, couldn't help but acknowledge his skill. He knows how to put on a show. A man who could wreak havoc in the middle of enemy lines, showing no mercy, instilled fear by demonstrating his overwhelming power. Through that fear, he rendered the enemy formation utterly helpless. Particularly impressive was how he evaded the ambush of crossbowmen. If it were me, I'd have charged straight into the crossbowman first. Clearly, he was well trained. It was no accident he was called a master of combat and war. Instead of neutralizing the crossbowmen, he left them untouched. Then, when they aimed for him, he displayed his reserved strength. He leaped into the air and struck at the enemy commander. He was like a flying tiger. A winged predator. Ragnar assessed the opponent's skill level and compared it to his own. This was someone who had already traveled the path he himself was walking. At that level, it wouldn't take long for him to reach it. There was no need for shortcuts or grueling training. Rem had analyzed his strategy while Ragnar evaluated his level of ability. His swordsmanship is sharp. A hybrid of quick swordplay and heavy strikes. At first glance, it seemed like he used orthodox techniques, but it was all sleight of hand. Quick and heavy techniques intertwined seamlessly. Clearly, he had an excellent sword instructor. Normally, mixing two styles like that would result in sloppy basics. But the crimson-cloaked squire showed no signs of such flaws. Well, he is a squire, after all. Ragnar felt a strange lack of motivation. The path was clear, and the destination was visible. Watching someone who had already gone ahead didn't stir competitiveness within him. All that remained was to keep walking, enduring the monotony of training. The tedium of honing his blade in a state devoid of emotion, this was the burden of his exceptional talent. Jackson, meanwhile, evaluated the gaps in the enemy's actions. At least 5 times. The enemy could have eliminated the cloaked figure at least 5 times. It wasn't an issue of ability but of strategy. The commander's foolishness played a part, as did the shock of an unexpected assault. If Jackson had been in their position, the battle would have ended before reaching that point. The religious zealot among them, watching the squire's movements, nodded. A brother who skillfully leads souls to the Lord's side. A high compliment for his combat prowess. We don't even need to step in now. Kreis, watching the battlefield, clicked his tongue. It was astounding that just one man could dominate the flow of the battle. Victory seemed assured before the fighting even began. And Incrid. This is what it means to be a knight. He was moved to his core. His heart pounded furiously, and his body trembled. Goosebumps rose on his skin, and he felt a chill down his spine. At the same time, a burning heat rose from his abdomen. His gaze never left the squire. In the current continent, squires and junior knights formed the backbone of knightly forces. They were one step away from knights who could single-handedly change the tide of war. A killing machine had just swept through the battlefield, slain the enemy commander, and returned unscathed. How can someone like that exist? The cloaked figure wasn't a beastkin or a frog. Yet, how could he possess such power? The symbol of might, capable of cutting down 1,000 foes alone, that is what it means to be a knight. What makes such a feat possible? What drives someone to push the boundaries of human limitations? Incrid didn't know. Perhaps that very ignorance made him marvel all the more at the squire's movements. At the same time, he felt something explode within his mind, a sudden spark of inspiration. Sometimes, learning is as simple as watching, echoed the words of a swordsmanship instructor from the big city, passing through his thoughts. As his initial excitement subsided, an unintentional yet pure focus took hold of him. Once his concentration sharpened to a superhuman level, he began to understand the purpose behind the squire's steps and the intent of each swing of his sword. Middle sword technique. The strength of the middle blade. The ability to wield a sword with great power inherently meant the ability to swing it swiftly as well. The opponent had fused the essence of the middle sword with the speed of a quick blade. Incrid could finally see it now. He shifted his footing. It seemed like the squire was subtly stepping back, as though defining the range of his attacks. No, he's not defining it, he's already defined it. The northern-style middle sword that Ragnar had taught him was built upon establishing an attack line as its foundation. The squire's method was slightly different. He drew a circle around himself as his focal point. It was swordsmanship rooted in the central continent's foundational techniques. The squire carved a circle with his body at the center and slaughtered anyone within it. If they entered, they were cut. If they approached, they were pierced. At a glance, it appeared as though he was using footwork to dominate his opponent, but the reality was different. He's guarding his range. He only used his feet when necessary. Though a few impressive sword strikes caught the eye, most of his attacks were thrusts. Incrid observed repeatedly, gathering the details his eyes absorbed and organizing them in his mind. Does middle swordsmanship always have to rely on raw power to strike downward? The ultimate move displayed by Mitch Hurrier wasn't an advanced or light technique, it was a decisive strike in the middle sword style. The wheel strike, which cuts through anything in its path. Why did he choose that as his trump card? To deceive his opponents? No. Dividing swordsmanship into 5 methods didn't necessarily mean they were entirely distinct from one another. All 5 styles shared intersections. The middle sword didn't always have to rely on sheer force to slash downward. Incrid's eyes darted about. His mind churned. His fingers twitched involuntarily. Enjoying the show? I.M. casually tried to start a conversation but quickly stopped. Ragnar, finding the squire's movements no longer intriguing, turned his attention to the voice behind him. Leave him be, Ragnar whispered. He could immediately tell what state the squad leader was in. In battles, taverns, alleys, or even the embrace of a lover, epiphanies often struck like a prank played by the goddess of fortune. Suddenly, abruptly, without warning, they would arrive in silence, shaking one's very core. Guard the flanks, Jackson suggested, stepping forward. Ragnar moved to the right, while I.M. took the left. The squad's cleric silently moved to stand behind Incrid. Big Eyes whispered, "What's going on?" I.M. answered in a hushed tone, "Looks like the squad leader's breaking through his shell." About time, too. All those nights practicing alone are paying off. I.M. acknowledged the squad leader's efforts. He deserved this moment. Of course, this wasn't mere luck. It was the natural result of countless battles, rigorous training, and a constant return to the fundamentals of swordsmanship. Ragnar, now more intrigued by Incrid's state than the squire's, thought to himself, how is this possible? What drives a man like the squad leader to push himself so relentlessly, despite knowing his limits? It was an enigma to Ragnar, more fascinating than any opponent tearing through a battlefield. Shortly after the knights returned, the commanding officer's rallying cry echoed through the air. Charge! The Allied forces surged forward en masse. Their shouts mixed with war cries, and the earth trembled beneath the stampede of infantry. And yet, Incrid stood still, his gaze lost in the void. He remained in his trance-like state. The squad of troublemakers, thanks to their exploits in the earlier battle, could afford to stand aside as mere observers. No one dared to question their inactivity. Even if someone had wanted to speak up, the sheer intensity emanating from the four, excluding Big Eyes, was too overwhelming to approach. Though the squire's feats of strength on the front lines drew awe, those close enough to witness the troublemaker squad agreed, they were far more terrifying. Thus, as the war hurtled toward its conclusion, the squad remained untouched. This winter and the following spring would surely be busy. Supplies would see them through the colder months, but fortifications would need to be rebuilt. the borders between Norillia and Aspen would be redrawn. While the allies charged ahead, Ingrid replayed the fundamentals he'd learned. Intersections, swordsmanship, Valen-style mercenary techniques, Northern-style middle swordsmanship. Everything was a weapon in his arsenal. There was no need to confine those weapons within the rigid framework of fundamentals. A middle sword could deflect and divert. Binding, the technique of attaching swords, was the foundation of parrying. When he first learned it, he hadn't even noticed. Though his state of enlightenment didn't instantly elevate his skill, it provided clarity. His innate talent was modest, so he couldn't instantly embody what he had realized. However, Ingrid had identified his limitations. That realization carried immense significance. It meant that, given enough time, he could train to his limit and even surpass it. The impossibly high cliff, its peak shrouded in mist, had begun to reveal its summit. When the wall before you is too tall, too broad, and its end is unseen, you cannot climb it. But if you can glimpse its end, no matter how distant or daunting, you can scale it, even if you must crawl. Ingrid understood this now. Oh. The joy overwhelmed him, even causing him to drool slightly in his trance-like state. What's with the drooling, seriously? I am quipped, unimpressed. Ingrid snapped back to reality and scanned his surroundings. He realized there wasn't a single allied soldier nearby. They've all charged forward. If you're tired, rest in the barracks. Don't doze off standing here, I am chided. Nothing. Let's head back. Seems like the battle's wrapped up without us. And so it was. The Crimson Cloak Squire returned to the main camp. The battle had ended. The enemy forces were retreating, fleeing back to their homeland. It was time to withdraw. Time to return to the city. As Ingrid turned, his eyes lingered on the setting sun. The squire's overwhelming strength had reignited a flame within his chest. His destination, his ideal, stood before him once again. And with it, an old dream resurfaced. What does it take to become a knight? It wasn't just about honing one's strength. He would first need to prove his skill. The time for remaining a low-ranking soldier had ended. Ingrid silently vowed this to himself.